Hi, I'm John Cruz, and you're watching Cruise Control. Uh, Today, I wanted to uh, change it up a little bit. I tried making a video numerous times while I was driving. I figure it would be like a rolling podcast kind of thing. And it didn't really work out too well because while you're driving, you do get kind of distracted, and it's not exactly the safest thing to do. And also, uh, I kind of found myself struggling to make coherent thoughts, and also uh, when I deleted it and tried it again, I told things out of order, and it made it probably even more confusing than if you had never watched the video at all. And then I tried it again, and then I said, screw it, just deleted everything. Then I also did a little bit of research. I'm glad I did delete everything because there were some things in there that I said that weren't exactly the truest things because I was too lazy to do the research. So I believe everything now is pretty much copacetic. I got some notes written on the side here. So we're gonna try it this way. And maybe it's not the most exciting thing in the world, but whatever. It is what it is. I'm more worried about the information being conveyed rather than the presentation of it. So um, the video I wanted to do was the history of the Ford LTD from 1965 all the way up through 1991, and then also the definition of the nameplate LTD and where it came from, and some of the common misconceptions. Because I've been noticing a lot of misinformation online. Um, you'll see them in these AI generated videos where they say some stuff that's not exactly technically wrong, but it's not really right, and it's very vague. And then there is some stuff that's just flat out wrong. And you'll see those, and you'll see the Facebook uh, pages and stuff where it shows 1978 Lincoln Continental Mark V, and then the picture is of a 78 town car, and then the interior picture is of like an 81 Mark VI, and then all the people who start commenting and just, oh, I gotta correct it, I gotta fix it, and they start typing, no, 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 you got it all wrong, what are you guys doing, and blah blah blah. And at first I was like, yeah, what the hell's going on with these sites? Then I realized um, that basically all those comments are just boosting that site or that video's popularity, and it's putting it up ahead, and it's like the more you tell the lie or the more you just talk about it, the more popular it is. So um, I got kind of sick and tired of trying to correct everything because that's the type of guy I am. I get very petty and stuff, and I gotta be right, no matter what. um, it's like winning the battle but losing the war kind of thing. So I just wanted to kind of, you know, clear up some things. Now I know a lot of you folks who signed on to my channel simply signed on just for the Chicago Cutlass and nothing more. And okay, that's fine. I just same thing. I every positive or negative comment or subscription, is good. Any press is good press. Any business is good business. So an update on the Chicago Cutlass. Basically, the motor is shot. I mean, it still runs, but it smokes so bad you can't drive the thing down the road. And on top of that, the exhaust is all screwed up, so the burning oil smoke is just coming right up through where the floorboard should have been, and right into the interior of the car. And it's like like Cheech and Chong. So, um, yeah. Looks like the heads have been redone, but the problem is that 5 out of 8 of the spark plugs, all the threads are stripped out, and the plugs are just loctited into the head. So, like doing a compression test is kind of tough. Um, the seals and everything look good, and the only thing he's thinking is that the oil's coming past the rings. And I do kind of want to drive the car, and I'm not Master Mechanic or anything. A lot of you guys out there are like, oh, just LS swap it, and it's like, oh, that's fucking easy. I just All I need is the money, the know-how, the tools, the time, and the space, and the motor, and the computer, and all the stuff, and to be able to put it all together and make it run. Yeah, just all that stuff. That's simple. Um, so I'm having him do it, and it'll probably be ready about spring or so. Right now, it's just buried in snow and frozen in, and there's a bunch of cars blocking it in. So it's not really a priority right now. But that being said, I am going to be on the lookout for a 260 V8, a 307, or an old 350, or maybe a 403. Um, and if it's cheap, if it's local, and if I have the time and the money, I'll go pick it up in a little trailer, and that'll be that. So, anyways, Ford LTD. So, um, one of the most common misconceptions is, what does LTD mean? And uh, I should have looked this up. From my understanding, it was that Buick had already started using limited on some of their vehicles. I think like the LeSabre or the Electra or something like that, and around the mid '60s, and then Ford, in response to the Chevy Caprice, which was basically just a luxury version of the Impala, they wanted to have a luxury version of the Galaxy 500. So they came up with LTD. And like, to the average person, it's like, well, it's short for limited, and nobody really cared. But they didn't want to like get the two cars that were kind of relatively similar in style and stuff mixed up and like lose market share to Buick and vice versa. So they didn't really officially call it limited. They didn't really say much of anything about it. It was just LTD, and people just kind of assumed it was short for limited. And then, a decade or so goes by and people start asking, like, well, what does it really mean? And then Ford was kind of like, well, officially it doesn't really mean anything, but kind of unofficially it's limited. It's the abbreviation for limited. Um, in '79 or '78 or something like that, Ford of Australia release released a press release. They released a press thing, and they said, "Oh, it's Lincoln type design." And like, I guess if you're a Ford of Australia and you don't offer Lincolns, I guess you can get away with it. um, in order to get a Lincoln down over there, you would have to basically buy one in the United States and import it over, and then have it converted to right-hand drive. And actually, if you watch Mad Max, the first movie, the two big American cars come pulling up. One's a mid '70s Riviera, and the other one is a early '70s town car, and they're both converted to right-hand drive. And then the guys get out and give Max the bad news that there was no contest and nobody showed, and he got all angry, and then they had to let what's his face go. Um, so they weren't really very protective of the Lincoln division name, but in the United States, where Lincoln is pretty easy to get if you have the money, um, the Lincoln division, much like GM with Cadillac and Corvette, it's very protected. So, you can share panels on a Mercury Grand Marquis and a Ford Crown Victoria, even back into the '80s, and it's pretty much just swap on and off with a few minor differences. Like the fenders of a '97 Mercury are slightly different than a '97 Ford, but there's a lot of like part sharing going on. Like GM, the '80s Delta '88 and the LeSabre and the Parisienne and the Caprice and the Impala all kind of like shared the same stuff. The glass is the same. The door panels were either the same, or there might be like a swage line on one and it's not on the others. But they would just, you could bolt them in and it would kind of fit, right? But you wouldn't be able to take the doghouse or the doors off of a Lincoln Town Car and put it on a Grand Marquis or a Crown Victoria. You couldn't take the same thing, like the doghouse, which means like the fenders, the hood, and the core support, and the header panel, and the fender or the doors, um, did I say, yeah, fenders, hood, core support, and header panel, or the doors, and put them on a Caprice or vice versa. They wanted to keep that like special, you know. So uh, rewind back to '65 when the name came out, like they wouldn't have called it Lincoln type design because it would be kind of like devaluing the Lincoln brand, the Lincoln division, and you know, if anything, really the '65 Ford LTD, Ford Galaxy LTD didn't really look much like a Lincoln. It, if anything, it had more Cadillac design language in it with the stacked headlights, you know, and uh, it didn't really exude Lincoln type design. If anything, you probably would have been able to put the Lincoln type design onto the Montclair or whatever the Mercury was for that year. Um, and that looks a little bit more Lincoln esque than the Galaxy LTD. So I'm pretty sure that that's bunk, but who knows? Then somebody's like, "Oh, it's Lincoln Thunderbird design," and it's like, well, I mean, a '65 Thunderbird doesn't really look much like a '65 Galaxy LTD either. So, and also the Thunderbird doesn't really look much like the Lincoln of the day. Maybe if you fast forward into the '70s, where all the cars kind of had that pointed turn signal, like Lincoln kind of thing. But then why would they have named it LTD back in '65? You know, it's just people like just making up stuff to try to like fill the question, fill the answer that nobody really has the answer to officially. Another one I've heard is Lincoln. Oh, I'm sorry, luxury trim decor, and which almost kind of makes sense for 1965 because it's an added luxury package on top of the Galaxy 500. So okay, yeah, it's a Galaxy 500 luxury trim decor. And that would kind of make sense, except in '75 when they took they got rid of like custom 500, except for Canada. They got rid of the Galaxy and the Galaxy 500. All that went out the way, and then to replace those lower models, they made the base LTD, and then the LTD Landau was the high end, top of the line Ford. So why would you then use that nameplate that's supposed to be luxury trim decor and attach it to vehicles like taxi cabs and police cars that had zero luxury options on them? You know, luxury trim decor by that point is kind of like a trim package that you would get on, you know, a mom and pop uh, base LTD where you get the nicer door cards and maybe a bench seat and a power driver seat and some power windows and locks or something like that. So I kind of think that that's bunk too. Now I could be totally wrong. I want to say that I'm right. I want to say I'm 99.99% sure that I'm right. And maybe I'm wrong. You know, maybe there's some office memorandum floating around out there from Henry Ford II, dated in 1964, saying, yeah, we're going to call it the Galaxy Luxury Trim Decor or Lincoln type design because we just don't give a fuck, you know? But uh, and another thing, nobody arguing for these names has really any evidence either, except for the one press release, which was 15 years after the introduction of the LTD, and also not even on the same continent, not even in the same hemisphere, you know. So, um, that being said, I'm going to come out and say it. And there's a couple other of these like uh, online car magazines and stuff, and they've kind of come to the same conclusion. They just say, "Oh, it's whatever you want it to believe. You know, whatever you believe it is, it is." And I'm like, "Well, not really. I mean, it's unofficially limited, short for limited, but officially it's just nothing." So that being said, let's start off with history, and I touched on it a little bit. And '65 was the year that General Motors took the Chevrolet Impala SS, well, the Impala, let's say, and they made a luxury version of it. And instead of calling it the Impala Caprice, they just called it the Caprice. They made it a whole new model. And Ford, either GM did it first and then Ford followed, or Ford did it first and GM followed. I think GM did it first, honestly. And Ford was like, okay, well, we're going to take our Galaxy 500, which was at the time, the top of the line Ford, which was the bottom line division. It was like the working man's car. It was like the Chevrolet, for GM. They had the Ford was the working man's car, and the Mercury was kind of like, oh, I climbed the corporate ladder a little bit. I'm like a mid-level manager or something like that. And then Lincoln was like, movie stars and presidents and politicians and rich hoity-toity people who wanted an American car. And if you were like one of those weird foreign actors and actresses, then they did like Rolls Royce and Mercedes and BMW and things like that. So, um, so yeah, they decided, well, let's kind of dude up the Galaxy 500 and attach this variant, this trim package to it, and there we go. And most of them, like they did have some that were post model cars where you had the door and then you also had the frame around the window and the window would roll down and you would still have that like thing. And they would have the B pillars, right behind you. But most of them I've seen out there are four-door hardtops where when you open the door and you roll the window down, it's just the half door, like the glass is, and then there's nothing, and then there's no B pillar behind you. It's just your A pillars and your C pillars, and there's just a wide open. You roll down all four windows, and there's just nothing there. And the station wagon version, they didn't call it an LTD as of yet. It was still like the ones without wood were just the Galaxy or Galaxy 500 or Custom 500 wagons, and then the ones with the wood were called the Country Squire, just Ford Country Squire, not Ford LTD Country Squire. That didn't come around until like 1971 or something like that. 66, you basically, it was the same body per se, but like the grill was a little different, the taillights were a little different. And then in 66, they called it the Ford LTD. It was the Custom 500, then the Galaxy, then the Galaxy 500, and then the LTD. Not Galaxy LTD, it was just LTD. And 67, they kind of raked out the swage lines and the shoulder lines a little bit. They kind of smoothed out the rear C pillar, and it almost kind of has like a fastback kind of design to it. They still had the stacked headlights for that year, but it was like more aggressive and pointed forward. It kind of looked like it was moving when it was standing still. It was kind of a cool design. I kind of like the 67s. They kind of like stretched the taillights and kind of made them vertical, and it was a cool looking car. And also, I forgot the LTDs from 65 on up also came in a convertible, a two-door convertible, as well as the four-door post sedan and the four-door pillarless hardtop, and the yeah, that was it. Uh, oh, and the two-door as well. So 68, they changed the front end a little bit. They got rid of the stacked headlights and they put them side by side, and then the LTDs got the vacuum operated hideaway headlights, while the Galaxies and the lower trim cars had exposed four headlights. They switched up the taillights a little bit. They changed a few things on the swage lines. They changed the interior just a little, but for all intents and purposes, kind of the same car, just with different front end. 69, the front end kind of looks similar. The grill work is a little different. And then the taillights, they made a rectangle and they put them up. They kind of look like 66 taillights, but just up higher off the bumper and like integrated into the tail panel of the car. And really nothing has changed as far as the model lines go. And then 70, they changed the taillights again. They kind of reworked a little bit of the outside. It's still kind of pretty much the same car from 68 to 70 with little differences. And then there was a big redesign in 71. And in 71, they had that four exposed headlights on all the cars, whether it was a custom 500 or whether it was an LTD. They started calling the Country Squires LTD Country Squires. And I believe you can get an LTD wagon without the wood, but if it had the wood, then it was called the LTD Country Squire. And I know you can get wagons on the lower trim ones. I think the Galaxies, they call them a country sedan or something really bizarre like that. Um, but we're talking LTD, so we're not going to go too far into the weeds. But if you watch White Lightning, or White Lightning, he had Gator McCluskey drove not an LTD, but it was a Galaxy, but it had that same front end, that prominent where the ends stick out, and the four exposed headlights, and then like the little almost like a mouth, in the center of the grill, and on the back they had the taillights up off the bumper, and then a center taillight for the LTD that had four bulbs in it, and I believe all four were parking lights, and then the middle two lit up when you push the brake pedal, which I thought was really kind of cool. It's awesome. 72, they just took basically the taillights and put them onto the bumper itself, and they kind of reworked the grill a little, but I think you can still swap the 71 to 72 grill. If you watch the sequel to Dirty Harry, Magnum Force, a lot of those cars that they drive are either Galaxies or custom 500s, but Harry Callahan, his personal vehicle is a 72 or a 71 LTD convertible, blue with the white top and white interior. And that film came out in 73, I think, and those cars are still fairly new vehicles, and they trash one at the very end. Like, they just destroy the crap out of the thing and then blow it up even. It's kind of cool. Like, one had to die in order for Hollywood to do its magic. And then in 73, they redesigned the whole body again, and they stayed kind of with the same overall shell all the way up through 78. All these pictures I'm showing on over my face and everything, I'm trying to describe them as well. And also, I'm going to do a side note. If any of these pictures turn out to be yours, let me know, and either I could take them down or I could give you credit for them or something. I just went on Google and just started like randomly grabbing pictures, and some of the pictures are actually my own, of my own cars, but very few of them. Most of them are just pulled right off the internet. So, if you're a real stickler about, somebody else using your pictures, which, like, if somebody was doing that on purpose to me, I'd be kind of pissed off. Just let me know, and sorry, whatever. I can put your name or your website or whatever on there, or I can put another picture in and go back and re-edit it or something like that. Just let me know. So the 73s, and to me, the 73s and the 74s kind of look the same. They have like the bigger taillights in the back that are more like rectangular, like that big. And then I think the LTD, I know the Mexican market ones, they have a center taillight that connects the two that says LTD, and it lights up when you put on the parking lights. But I think the United States ones, it's just like a reflector or like a blacked out thing that says LTD on it. And then the fronts are kind of like, if you watch Starsky and Hutch, I think it's Hutch who has his personal vehicle is like a 73 Galaxy or a custom 500. It's all beat the crap out of. It's that this style design. Excuse me. It's that design of a vehicle, and uh, they still had the custom 500 at that time. They still had the Galaxy at that time, and the Galaxy 500, and they also had the LTD. And I think in 71 they started the LTD Brougham, which was like a higher version of the LTD. If it doesn't get any more confusing than that, like, just leave it to Ford to make things more confusing by playing fast and loose with their nameplates. They've done that since the 60s, and they did that all the way up through the early 90s, basically, with the the LTD and the Crown Victorias and the Galaxies and all. They just take the nameplates and just keep reusing them in different things. So um, the 73 and the 74, there's minor differences in the grill. Um, and you can get the LTD. Actually, all the cars, they come pretty much standard as a four-door pillared hardtop, where it's like a hardtop where there's no pillar, but except there's a pillar there. The doors, you open them, there's no frames on them, they just open up, like I said, and there's no, like that. Um, and then you could still get four-door hardtops on those. Um, for the LTD wagons and the Country Squire, they call it LTD Country Squire, just like 71, 72. But the ones with wood were the Country Squire, and the ones without were just LTD or Galaxy 500 or Custom 500, pretty much like 71, 72. I think that was 74 was the last year of the 429, and then they went to a 460. The earlier model motor sizes I'm not too familiar with, but I think by 73 they had a a 351 Windsor, a 400, and a 429, and maybe a 302. I know in the 75 through 78s, you couldn't get a 302 if it was California emissions or something like that. But I don't think they really had emissions in 73. There was no cats on the cars or anything like that. So let's fast forward to 75. 75, you saw a big change. One other one of these like big plurific changes. The body pretty much stayed the same, except the header panel. Header panels were different. The tail panel was different, but the doors were pretty much the same. The shell, except for the tail piece, was the same. The frame was basically the same. The dash was pretty much the same. Like the steering wheel, instead of having just the spokes like this, it had the spokes that kind of came down like that. Um, so for your base LTDs, uh, the base LTD replaced the Custom 500 and the Galaxy. So the base LTD had to basically fill all the fleet demand that the Custom and the Galaxy would have normally done. Taxis, police cars, code enforcement, meter readings, and stuff like that. And I looked up a police brochure for 73 and 74. And this is where, in my previous videos, I would have been dead wrong. I thought that you could take, as long as it was a full-size Ford. I don't know about the Mercuries. I know Mercury did offer a police package on their full-size Marquis, but I don't think it was for the Grand Marquis or anything else. But I thought as long as it was a full-size Ford, you can piecemeal whatever you want out of the package or put the whole package in and have a vinyl top, four-door hardtop, with the high back seats and plush everything and power everything and automatic climate control and all the bells and whistles, and then still have the 140 mile an hour speedometer, the tuned up, hopped up 429, and the big 9-inch and the four-wheel disc brakes and all of everything. But according to the brochures, it was only offered for the for 73, 74, the Custom 500 or the Galaxy, and I think the Galaxy 500 in coupes, sedans, or wagons. And then also for Torinos, in I think all models except the Brougham, the whatever the high end Torino is. I think they call it a Brougham because when they changed it to the LTD2 in 77, there was the base model and then there was the Brougham. So yeah, you really, they kind of kept it to a minimum, and most of them were in packages. They call it like the Trooper package or the Sentinel package or this package or that package. But you could kind of like, you know what, I want to have this car, but I don't want to have the big motor. I don't need the certified speedometer. I'm going to have like a fleet of taxis or something like that. I want all the cop underneath stuff, but I don't need the power. I don't, this car is not going to see anything north of 90 miles an hour, so I don't need a 140-mile-an-hour certified speedometer. And on top of that, um, up until 77, the civilian ones had a 120-mile-an-hour speedometer anyways. So, like, really, do you need to pay the extra to have that extra 20 miles per hour and to have the individual markings for each mile per hour or whatever it was? So, you know, just to clarify, the police package was only offered on the lower end full size Fords and the lower end intermediate size Fords up until the Fox body Fairmonts came out and the Mustangs, and we'll get to that later. So 75, the base model LTD had to take care of all that, and then on top of that had to fill the retail position. So like an average lower middle class dad like me, if I had to buy a brand new car and I wanted a full size 6-passenger 4-door sedan, I probably would get a base LTD at that point. And just air conditioning, AM radio. I don't need any power windows, locks, anything like that, and like a nice little V8 motor, like a Windsor, just to move it around. Um, the From 75 on up, you had the 302, 351 Windsor, the 351 modified, which is basically there's something about it. It's like a 400, but it's like D-stroked, and the 400 is like I don't know. It's very similar to a 351 Cleveland. There's something about those motors. That's why they call it a modified. So the 351 modified and the 400 are essentially kind of the same engine, just different displacement. When you open the hood, they look identical. They look exactly the same. And then for the big block cars, they had a 460 in them, and then the cop cars had the 460, but it was like tuned differently, and they had 4-wheel disc brakes on a 9-inch rear end, which is really kind of nice. I really want one of those. So you had the base LTD, and then you had the LTD Landau, which you could tell the difference between the two because the LTD Landau had the hideaway headlights, and the base one did not. Um, and a lot of the things you could get optional on the base came standard on the LTD Landau, and a lot of the options in the Landau, some of them you could not get on the base. With the wagons, it was pretty clear at this point. They made it very simple. It was if you didn't have the wood, then you didn't have the hideaway headlights, and it was not a Country Squire. It was just an LTD. If you had the wood, then you had the hideaways, and then it was an LTD Country Squire. The end. Not really much of anything changed up until 79. Like I said, in 77, they went to an 85-mile-an-hour speedometer. The trunk lip on the 78s is slightly different. They lost a little bit of chrome going from 75 to 76 or 76 to 77, something like that. But all intents and purposes, they were the same car. Everything was pretty much the same. So around this time, you had in 1977, you had, like I said, the Torinos. That was the last year of 76 was the last year of the Torinos, and then they took that body and they reskinned it and put the stacked rectangle headlights on it, which was the design language at the time. So if you look at the intermediates from Mopar, the Fury and the Monaco, like Roscoe P. Coltrane or Hunter, or the cop cars at Terminator, they had stacked headlights. The 77 Malibu, before they downsized them, they had stacked headlights too. It was like a common thing. So they took this car, this intermediate car, and put the stacked headlights on it, and they called it the LTD2, which made things a little bit more confusing. And on the Mercury side, and instead of the Montego, and then the Cougar being the sporty coupe, they just called everything a Cougar. So you had Cougar sedans and Cougar wagons, at least just for 1 year. The Fords and the Mercurys, the intermediates, they only had a wagon for 77, and then they stopped altogether. And they kept pushing the coupe and the sedan up until 1979. And the coupes, they had a LTD2 Sport, which had like hockey stick stripes and Magnum 500 wheels, and it had like a tack on it and maybe a floor shifter. It was kind of cool. Um, because like the lack of performance, they had to make up for it somehow. So they're like, oh, it's either going to be super luxurious or it's going to be super sporty and aggressive. Um, and like I said before, uh, they had the base LTD2, and I think they had like a lower one called the S, and it was like a super cheap fleet mooch model package. Then they had the Brougham, which was above that. It was a luxury option, and then the Sport, which was the sporty option. And for the LTD2 wagons, they had the base LTD2, which wagon, which without the wood, and then the ones with the wood were just called the Squire. They weren't called a Country Squire. 77 LTD2 Squire. Um, and even though it's an intermediate car, it was, let's see, I wrote it down somewhere. So it was only 5 inches shorter than the full size LTD, and it only weighed about 100 or 200 pounds less. And when they downsized the full size LTD in 79 to the Panther platform one, you actually had the full size LTD, which was smaller and lighter weight than the intermediate size LTD2. And that was 300 pounds lighter. So a 79 LTD Landau or an LTD Panther car was, 300 pounds lighter and about 10 inches shorter. And then in 80 they got rid of the LTD2. And around this time, it was like the great downsizing. So the standard, the 70s standard of cars was the full size ones, which were like the 73 through 78 size Fords, or the 71 through 76 GMs like Caprice, Impala, Delta 88, 98, Catalina, Bonneville, Sedan DeVille, Coupe de Ville, and the Fleetwoods are always a little bit bigger too, anyways. So those were like 4,500 pounds, 127-inch wheelbase. The Lincoln Continental town car was another big imperial class car, I like to call them. Another over 125-inch wheelbase, 4,500-pound tank. And then the Chryslers, I don't know exactly how much they weighed, but they were similar. The Imperials themselves were actually longer than a Cadillac, and I think they were just as heavy, if not heavier, than the standard Sedan DeVille, at least for 73. And that was like the standard go-to for a full-size car. And then the intermediate cars were usually around upper 3,000 pounds, like 38, 3,900 pounds. They were, let's see, like 220 inches instead of like 230 in overall length. The intermediates would usually have like 115-inch wheelbase. The LTD2 and the Torinos would have 114 for the coupe, 118 for the sedan and the wagon, and the GMs were kind of similar. The Mopars were kind of similar. They were like the they were the 70s version, standard of an intermediate, but by 80 standards they would have been a full size. And then the mid-size cars would be like Granadas, Novas, uh, uh, whatever, Skylarks, and Aspen, the Volare or Volair, whatever the hell you want to pronounce it. Those were all mid-sized cars. The Chrysler M bodies of the 80s were basically 70s mid-sized cars. That's where it started. They started in like whatever 77, and they were just slightly fancier F-body Aspen Volare cars. So what GM did was they saw the writing on the wall and they said, you know what, we got to kind of, we already had the first gas crisis. The the hands are tightening around the throat of the American car, and those hands are the government, cafe regulations, emissions, the EPA, people that the American public had voted in to basically just, you know, emasculate the American motor car. So they said, okay, we're going to have to decrease the size and the weight of these things because that 76 Caprice with a 454, with barely 200 horsepower that gets like 6 miles to the gallon, that's not going to cut it. People aren't going to buy that damn thing. So in 77, they took all their full size cars and they downsized them to smaller than their intermediate cars. So 77, the Malibu was actually as big or bigger than the Impala or the Caprice. Um, and Chrysler was kind of like in a state of disarray. They were on the verge of bankruptcy, and like Lee Iacocca took over in like 79 or something. And he's like, no more of this big car crap. We're gonna slap together the R body in 79, and then it's only gonna last till 81. He was more focused on first giving Frank Sinatra his Imperial, which turned out to be a colossal piece of junk. If it wasn't for all the computers and crap, and if people knew how to fix the damn thing, then maybe it would have been a good car. But nobody knows how to fix them. I don't know how to fix them, and like best thing to do is just to take out all the electronics and put in a MSD ignition and a carburetor and call it a day. But anyways, he wanted to focus on that and focus on the K cars. That was his big thing. It was like it's all hands on deck for the little Mitsubishi, sardine can K cars. Ford was like, you know what? We're gonna hold off on downsizing at least for another year. We're gonna try to push it off as long as we can. Because Ford is kind of famous for doing this in the late 70s all the way up through the 80s of holding off and allowing the car buying public to have that conservative kind of like the last of the big car, the last of the old school technology. So they offered the still offered the full size 78 LTD and the Landau, and they still offered the the intermediates, the gigantic ass LTD twos, which were still smaller than the full size, at least for that year. And there was a advertising campaign for 77 and 78, and they put the Sedan DeVille against the LTD Landau. And basically, it boiled down to why would you pay Cadillac money, full size Cadillac money, and get a intermediate size or to get an LTD size car? We for the price of an Impala can offer you that size vehicle with just our Fords. And the Lincolns are even bigger still. The Lincolns, they didn't, even when everybody else downsized in 79, they kept the Lincolns full size all the way into 1980. There's another one over there. We're going to offer the old school technology at least for one more year. It's kind of like a last hurrah. And I think that's like kind of cool. It's like, the last of the Mohicans, the not only the full size town car, but also like the intermediate size Lincoln Continental Mark V. And then in 80 they went to Panther cars too. The town car, the town coupe, and the Mark VI all went Panther platform, slightly bigger than the LTD and the Marquis. So in 70, yeah, I just gave it away. In 79, Ford threw in the towel and said, okay, we've been kind of messing around. Somebody told me somewhere along the line, and this might be more misinformation, that the design for the 79 LTD with the two headlights, not the four, was originally supposed to be like for the Granada, like they had penned it like back in the mid 70s, and they were like holding on to it for like when they wanted to square up the Granada. They didn't think things were going to go south so quickly. They thought that just the cars are going to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger every year, so that even their midsize is as big as an intermediate. And they said, okay, we're going to kind of freshen it up and shake it up a little bit, and that's going to be our full size car. Um, so that's the end of the big 121-inch wheelbase, 4,500 pound, behemoths of the LTD and the Landau, but they still kept the names for the Panther platform. So now it's 79. You got the 2 headlight base model LTD, and you have the 4 headlight LTD Landau, and then you have the corresponding wagons. The 2 headlight one without the wood, that was your LTD wagon. The 4 headlight one with the wood is your LTD Country Squire. You could tell that they're 79s because all the amber turn signals and parking lights have all been cleared out, and the bulbs themselves are amber. Another misconception is that whenever you see a 2 headlight LTD, you say, "Oh, that's a 79," because they made a shit ton of 79 LTD base LTDs because they still had to fill the fleet role, and they had to fill the retail full size economy role. And then the Landau was like the luxury one, and there was no mistaking that. Well, actually, some people will see a 79 and say, "Oh, it's a 79 LTD Country Squire." I'm not a Country Squire, a Crown Victoria. They figure because it's the same body as the later 80s Crown Victorias. Oh, they're all Crown Victorias. Even the 2 headlight ones are Crown Victorias. Another thing is that they would call, people would call the 79 2 headlight base model LTD an LTD-S. And the S didn't come around until 80. So we're going to flash forward to 80 now. All the turn signals are now amber instead of clear. And they're going to stay that way up until 1991, where they're going to go back to being clear again, just for one more year. Like Ford's last kind of like hurrah, and the last little tribute to, the starting of the Panther platform. So in 80, that's when you saw they got rid of the Landau name, at least for the American market. They kept it around in the Mexican market for another year or two. The Mexicans, they got kind of weird with their Panther cars. They would have, like in the later year, like the mid 80s, they would have Ford Grand Marquis, where it's a Grand Marquis body, but with a Ford dashboard and a carbureted 302, and like chrome on the pedals and all. Just like a hodgepodge of stuff. Their Country Squires were a Colony Park body and the wood, and the trim for the wood, but they would have the Ford fake wood where it had individual like lines, like it looks like planks, and then they would have the Ford front end and the Ford frame, basically, because the difference between the Ford and the Mercury frame is if you have your radiator and you have your grill so that the bumper is facing this way, there's the Mercury one is about that much wider, so that if you were to take that header panel off of a Mercury Grand Marquis or a Marquis and put it onto a Crown Vic, your grill would be pretty much flush in line with the bumper. And if you tried to take your Crown Victoria header panel and put it on the Mercury, you would have a severe underbite in your bumper. And on top of that, the Ford hoods from 79 through 87 were different than the Mercury hoods. The fenders were the same, but the lines on the hood themselves on the Mercuries were wider, or one of them was wider, one of them was shorter, and then the Ford had the center line. So you would have to change the hood then too. And also, it's a long drawn out thing, but the Mexicans got weird. So they got rid of the Landau name in 79, and they replaced it with the Crown Victoria. And you had your own special emblem for the hood ornament and on the B pillars, and you had almost all of them had a half vinyl top that like right at the B pillar would start and go down. And then you had the 79s, the Landaus. They had a 1 year only rocker chrome where it was a one piece thing where it like went up into the fenders, and then also over the doors. Like it was all stainless. It's kind of nice. In 80, they divided that so that the bottom part was a black trim piece, and then the chrome on the bottom of the doors. Um, and then you had uh, your two headlight LTD was now called the LTDS, and it was like a stripped down version. Uh, Most of the fleet agencies gravitated towards that, but some of them still, just did a base LTD with the four headlights. Um, I'm going to show a picture here of a police demonstrator from Ford. It's a 80 or an 81 Ford LTD, not an S, but not a Crown Victoria, just the standard LTD. And so between 80 and 82, there wasn't really much difference between the cars. From 79 to 81, you could get a 4.2 liter or 4.1 liter, 255 cubic inch V8 with a two barrel carburetor, a variable Venturi carburetor, which, um, from my understanding, I'm not Mr. Professional as far as like the inner workings of the carburetor. I've rebuilt one or two barrel Autolite 2100s, and that's about it. The Venturi is this little V thing that like kind of disperses the mystifies the gas as it gets mixed with the air or something. It provides turbulence in the air so that the gas has a more of a it mixes more with the mixture, whatever. And I guess on the variable Venturis, when you push the gas, like the V kind of like opens up and closes, and it's like a plastic thing instead of like a usual choke plate, and then you got your throttle plate. And mine, I had one on an 81 Marquis sedan, and it melted. So I was like, all right, enough of that. I just got a junkyard two barrel off of like a 78 T Bird or something and just put it on, and it ran like a rape tape after that. So, so yeah, the 255, you had your standard 302 cubic inch, 5 liter. It's technically like a 4.9, but 5 liter sounds way sexier. So they call it a 5 liter. And colloquially, it's known as the 5 liter. And then you had your 351 Windsor 5.8 liter V8, also carbureted, two barrel carburetor. And up until 81 or 82, you could still buy all three of those at the dealership. Um, you didn't have to have a police package car to have a 351 Windsor, but in 82, they they reserved it strictly for fleet sales, or if you have a Canadian market car. In Canada, you could still buy one off the rack, I think until 87 or 88 or something like that. And I always forget about talking about the transmissions. So in 79, all the cars had 3-speed automatics, and I don't know if they were FMX or C4 transmissions, but they were like the small block transmissions, and they were okay. They were fine. And then in 80, they offered as an option the AOD, automatic overdrive transmission, which means you get a fourth gear and it has overdrive. The engine spins slower than the output shaft would spin, or something like that. And save on fuel economy. The engine will run at a lower RPM at the same speed. Um, and then by 81, the AOD was standard on all the cars. And like the badging would be in different places. Like on 83, 84s, they had electronic fuel injection on the fenders. But 82, it said automatic overdrive. Um, so like there's just little things where you could tell. Like 82s had the blue oval on them, whether it was the S or the LTD or the LTD Country Squire or the LTD Crown Victoria. They all had all across the board. Ford put the blue oval on all their vehicles, and you could tell that's an 82 because of that. uh Before then it would just be FORD in the block lettering. So the 79 and 80s had the two slats in the front bumper. In mid 80, they changed from the sporty like mirrors into the ones that you see on pretty much every Crown Vic, where they're mounted on the door panel instead of like in the corner of the window. Um, so 83 was another prolific year for the LTD. This is where they took the LTD nameplate and they divided it up into two. They had the LTD Crown Victoria, which was still a Panther car, and now just like the base LTD had to take care of all the fleet and the retail, and then you had your LTD Landau. LTD Crown Victoria had to take care of everything from your moochiest stripped down fleet car all the way up to your top of the line, fully loaded Crown Victoria. It was all Ford LTD Crown Victoria. If you, they changed the grill, they changed the taillights a little bit. So telling the difference between an 83 through 87 Crown Victoria, it's you really have to have a really good eye. You have to either look at the back window, does it have the third brake light? That would be 86, 87, and then late 85s. Some of them would have the third brake light too. My first car was an 85 Crown Vic, and because it was a Mooch model, base model, but it had the outer appearance package and it was like that butter yellow, it didn't sell at all. So the dealership, even though like it was an 85 model year, they put on the third brake light and they didn't even really do it right. They just hacked into the left side brake slash turn signal circuit. So anytime you push the brake pedal or anytime you turn on the left turn signal, then the third brake light would either flash or stay on. While the other ones, no matter what you did with the turn signals or the hazards, the brake light, as long as you push the brake pedal, it would be on. Um, so, like late 85 through 87 had the third brake light. 83, 84 had the wood rectangle in the center of the steering wheel because from 79 to 82, 84, your horn, it wasn't honk honk, it was your turn signal lever, and you'd have to honk honk and push it in towards the steering column. They were trying to be more European or something, and they did that on the Fox body cars, and they did that on the Panther cars, and everything except for the pickups and the vans, I think. So they got rid of that in 85. So if you saw a soft horn button, it was an 85 through 87. 87s, like all the other cars would have on the passenger side of the dash, it would say LTD or LTDS or LTD Crown Victoria or something like that. 87, they just took off the nameplates. It didn't say anything. Um, 88 rolled around and they took the same. Oh, no. Let me go back before I go on to 88. We're still on the 83, 87s. The 83s, the 5 liters, the 302s would have central fuel injection, CFI. And basically, it's just a little throttle body with 2 injectors on it underneath the circular air cleaner. You open the hood and you go, oh, it's carbureted, right? And it's like, no, it's a high pressure fuel pump in the tank and it's fuel injected. And they ran a little bit better than the carbureted ones, not by much. 86, they replaced all that with an entirely new intake manifold, and it was multi-port fuel injection. So there was 8 injectors, and it ran a lot smoother and it was a lot more reliable, supposedly, than the CFI. Um, and it kind of looks like that sewing machine thing, and like the Mustangs have it the other way. The pickup trucks have a different style, but it's kind of the same concept. Uh, they use that all the way up through 91, at least for the 5 liters. But the 5.8s, the 351 Windsor, still had the 2-barrel carburetor on it. And what did they do to the LTD name? Not LTD Crown Victoria, but just LTD. They turned it into a Fox body car for 83. So basically, they took a Fairmont and they just kind of slanted the front and the rear end and different dashboard and kind of different seats and stuff. And that was your LTD. It came in a 4-door and a station wagon with or without wood. So you had your 2.3 liter 4-banger. You had a 3.8 liter Essex V6. I think they did not like The inline sixes, I think those are only for the Fairmonts. I could be wrong on that. If I am, put in the comments and tell me how stupid I am and how I don't know shit about cars. It's fine. I don't care. And then you could get the 5 liter in the LTD LX, which was kind of like a little bit more European looking. It had like blacked out stuff on it, and it was like the civilian way to get a 5 liter in your LTD sedan. And then they also offered the 5 liter in the police package LTDs. Um, the wagons without wood were just LTD. The ones with or without wood were LTD. With wood were Squires, LTD Squire, and they ran that body style up through '86, and they ran it alongside the '86 Ford Taurus, which came out. And it was another year, one of those years where Ford was like, we're still going to offer the traditional old school technology alongside the new one. So if somebody doesn't like the flying potato design of the Taurus, they can always just get an LTD and, be happy about it. And the Taurus is kind of cool because, on a side note, like it was so futuristic looking. They used it in the '87 film RoboCop, and originally RoboCop was gonna drive like an old '70s Firebird or Camaro, but they were like gonna like put all this like rocket wings and shit on it and everything. It was gonna be black and white with the light bar, and that was gonna be like his car. And the director and his prop guy were sitting there eating lunch outside in New York one day, and they saw an '86 or '87 Taurus roll by, and they're like, "That's it. That's going to be our police cars." And they wanted it to be like it's in the future, like 2040, but these cars are like old for that time. Like they're kind of beat up and old, and there's no funding to get new ones. So it's like futuristic poverty, I guess. But anyways, and then the Taurus kind of blew the LTD out of the water, and then that was the end of just the LTD name, at least for the American market. So, or '88, uh, they dropped the two-door version of the LTD Crown Victoria. All this time, from '79 to '87, you can get a coupe, Grand Marquis, Marquis, or LTD, LTDS, LTD Landau, or LTD Crown Victoria. And in fact, Chicago Police Department supposedly in the early '80s, they had LTDSs with the two headlights. They were coupes. They were all blacked out, and they were full police package cars. And like they were like unmarked cars, like the Jump Out Boys would drive around in those. According to one of my sources, and I hope I got all the details right because I had it pictured in my head when I was reading what he was typing, and I'm like, that's kind of fucking cool, like a 351 Windsor two-door base model LTDS, all in jet black with the dogdish hubcaps rolling up on you with the spotlight and everything. That'd be kind of cool. So '88, they got rid of the coupes, but they still had the sedans. Um, by this time, the high-end LX Crown Victorias, they used LX at least for '87, and I think '86 as well. They smoothed out the front end. They started using Mercury hoods instead of Ford hoods. They changed out the trunk and the taillight extensions. They had the back end just instead of like an angle. They tucked in the bumpers front and rear. Except for the wagon, they kept the rear bumper sticking out, the big ass bumper. From the header panel forward, or for header panel back, they didn't change much on the wagons. The dashboard was pretty much the same, except the paneling was slightly different. They kind of updated the paneling, and like a little bit of the trim on the C pillars, like where the vinyl top meets the metal, they changed that a little bit. But it was all intents and purposes. Like if you drove an '88, or if you've driven an '87, you've driven an '88. They kind of are the same. Where they changed it up was they kept the body the same, but then they uh, changed the dashboard, the firewall, the floor pans, the front seat brackets where the seat belts bolt into. They don't bolt into the floor anymore. Now they bolt to the seat, and they kept that way until 2011 when they stopped producing the Crown Vic, or at least for the American market. And then also in the rear seating positions, you got shoulder belts. I think you got them for either all three or for the outer two only. And then the middle one was a lap belt still. But the car stayed the same. Only in '91 they changed just the front marker lights and cleared them out again. And then in '92 they dropped the LTD name pretty much officially. Like you'll still see like repair manuals and stuff that say 1992 LTD Crown Victoria, but it doesn't say anywhere on the car or anywhere in the brochures or anywhere at all LTD for '92. And then they basically kept the dash and the firewall and all the stuff they changed in '90. They kept the same, and then they redesigned the car basically around it. It works, like it was a revolutionary new flying potato design. And the only thing I don't like about the '92s is that they got rid of the grill. They have the air intake down in the bumper. And I remember seeing in Motor Week that they took the square body like '91 Crown Victoria, like a slick top Crown Vic, and they put the front end of like a Mark 7 Lincoln on it to see how it would handle the redesign and whether or not it would keep itself cool without having a grill and everything coming up through the bumper. And apparently it did okay. But then in '93 they put the grill back in because I don't know, maybe people really didn't like it that way. So that pretty much closes the book on the Ford LTD. Uh, '92, you also saw the loss of the station wagons in general. '91 was the last year for the LTD Crown Victoria wagon and the LTD Country Squire. And I think in '90 and '91, you could get a Country Squire with wood delete. It would say on the Maroni Country Squire, Ford LTD Crown Victoria Country Squire, something like that. And then in the options, would delete minus X amount of dollars. And the same thing with the Mercuries, the Colony Park. Every now and then you'll find a woodless Colony Park where it still says Colony Park on the quarters and on the tailgate, but that's just Ford was like, whatever, screw it, just order whatever you want. We don't care. This thing is going bye sooner or later. And they kind of messed up. I think they should have kept the wagon going because GM really cashed in on that with the Roadmaster and the Caprice wagon and the Custom Cruiser up until '96 when they stopped building all the big traditional rear wheel drive cars, and then Crown Victoria was like, Ford was like, oh, let's just keep going. Just keep going until you're so sick of these cars, then we're going to get rid of them. And then 10 years down the road, you're like, man, I wish I had those cars back. It's funny listening to some of these retired coppers, like back when they were building Crown Victorias. Oh, yeah, those things are dinosaur. It's a piece of shit. It's a bag of donuts. It's a sloppy, fat piece of shit car. And then when they're all gone, it's like, man, I wish I had that Crown Vic back. You can like shoot it full of holes and blow it up and set it on fire and drive it off a cliff and it would still come back for more. Yeah, I wish we had those Crown Vics back. So I hope this cleared up a few things. Just to reiterate, it's not Lincoln type design. It's not Lincoln Thunderbird design. It's not luxury trim decor. It's not whatever the hell you want it to be. It's officially nothing. Unofficially, it's abbreviation for limited. An LTD2 is not a Fox body car. A Fox body LTD is not a LTD2. Just because it's a two headlight Panther LTD does not make it a 79. Also, it does not make it an S. It's the Crown Victoria. A lot of these, like cop car enthusiasts are like, oh, the first year of the Crown Victoria was '83. And I'm like, well, technically it's like 55 because like that's where they got the Crown Victoria nameplate from, was like from the mid to late 50s. But for what we're talking about, Crown Victoria started in 80, you know, but you would never see a 1980 Crown Victoria police car. It would always be an LTD or an LTDS. Um, and that's what they're trying to mean. But it's like say what you mean what you say. You know what I mean? Um, yeah, and that's pretty much it. Just you know, this I wanted to make this video under an hour, but it seems like every time I remake these videos, it just gets longer and longer and longer and longer. So I apologize for that. At least you didn't hear much of my ramblings and rantings. It was all pretty much, I think it was pretty much concise and stuff for the most part. There's a few things I kind of told out of order, but not nearly as bad as it was like, oh, we're already in 1988. Oh, we got to flash back to like 1971 for some reason. Now I got to jump to 77. And now I got to do this. Now I got to, So if you like this format where it's just kind of like a podcast, um, let me know in the comments. If you don't, also let me know in the comments. If you want me to get hit by a bus, I mean, let me know in the comments. I don't give a fuck. It's fine. you know. Um, and you expect to see more videos like this. Like the next one I want to do is just kind of like my memories of all the cars that my parents and my aunts and my uncles had, and like just the vague memories where you're just driving along and you just get that deja vu and you're like, oh yeah, I remember, you know, getting the paper with my old man and his powder blue 85 or 86 Escort LX, or the time when we traded in mom's 81 Toyota Corolla Tercel for a 91 Ford Festiva, and the thing was just billowing smoke in the parking lot of Braden and Ford. Um, and it broke down like three times to get there. It would have taken 15 minutes to get to the dealership, and it took like almost an hour and a half to get there. And they're like, "Yeah, we'll take it off your hands for you. It's not worth anything." So, um, and yeah, I'll see a little bit more like this. And once it starts warming up, and once I get the Cutlass ready to go, I'm gonna start driving that around and working on that thing. I wanted to review my Colony Park wagon, which I have been sitting on. It's one of my favorite vehicles, and I've never got around to doing it. Um, and yeah, so expect. Hopefully, I'll be get off my ass and start doing more videos. So, anyways, keep it shiny side up. Keep it under 100. Have a good one. All right, guys. I just wanted to make a couple corrections on the video that I just made. Um, First off, I did a little bit more research, and Buick was the one who had been using the nameplate limited, and from 1946 until 59, they used it pretty commonly on like the Roadmasters and things, and then they brought it back in '67. So I think the reason why Ford didn't officially say it was an abbreviation for limited is because the limited variant had been for a couple decades now already associated with Buicks, and then also a year after they used it as a model, the LTD Ford LTD for 1966 and 67, they tacked on limited again to their, I think, the Electra or something like that. So I just wanted to say, uh, uh, just wanted to make a correction there. And there was something else on the top of my brain. I just can't remember what it was. I'm sure it'll come to me after I finish this and put this on and get everything all pushed out there. Um, but uh, if you do see anything that I might have missed or I might have gotten a little bit wrong, like I said before, just go ahead and put in the comments. I appreciate it either way that you guys sat through this entire thing. Um, and it's it. I want to say it's about providing some form of entertainment or information, but it's really I enjoy talking about cars. I could be sitting there talking to a wall or a refrigerator about the 74 Plymouth Satellite or something like that, and I'd be just happy as a pig in shit. So um, that being said, once again, have a good day. Keep it shining side up. Keep it under 100.